Welcome everybody, you're tuned to the first episode to Agile Toolkit tutorial. And this tutorial is dedicated to those who wish to learn more about the Agile Toolkit framework or web software development in general. Your hosts that are Romans and myself, Armin. If you enjoy this tutorial, you will find all of the series on our website, agiletoolkit.org/tutorial. Let me please introduce the guy to you that will lead us down the path. Romans, and he's the very developer of Agile Toolkit.
Thanks, Armin. Happy to be here. Let's get right into it. Agile Toolkit is a web development framework. In other words, it helps you, developer, do your job faster, more professional, and more efficient.
Well, that's what they all tell us, isn't it? There are already so many frameworks around. Why another one? What's wrong with the choices which are currently popular?
The inspiration for Agile Toolkit is desktop application frameworks. You might know some of them. Next Step, known as Kakao today, Qt framework from Trolltech, Java Swing, and .NET focus on reusability of visible components and hiding the complexity of their implementation behind a simple object interface. Developing in Agile Toolkit is more similar to desktop development than to web development. You retain all the control over your web application's appearance. All of the results are produced through HTML with optional JavaScript, and as developer, you get to enjoy clean, simple, object-oriented interface to all of your components.
Okay, and what do we need to learn before we actually start with Agile Toolkit?
Actually, knowing too much can be harmful. I know developers who have developed over 5 years in other PHP frameworks, and when they started learning Agile, they constantly were overthinking it. If you are an expert, you would need to take a step back. Agile Toolkit is also good for those who only start web development. One requirement is knowledge of programming. Agile Toolkit does not aim to be point-and-click. Basic knowledge, especially understanding of object-oriented programming, is required.
And what do people need to start learning Agile Toolkit? What kind of software do they need or something like that?
The major requirement is a PHP and Apache on your local computer. You need at least PHP of version 5.3. Pick a good text editor or IDE environment. I will be using Sublime in my tutorial. To set up the environment, I recommend you to look into AMPPS. You will find a link to their website below this video. That is all you need. You then should download Agile Toolkit from the website. Download contains an archive with Agile Toolkit and some examples inside. Let me go through the contents of the archive and explain what's inside. ATK4 is all of the Agile Toolkit. That's the minimum you will need. It's a standard distribution and you shouldn't edit any files inside. When you're upgrading to a new version of Agile Toolkit, simply override this folder with a new one. ATK4 add-ons contains some essential add-ons, and we will not look into them at this point. The rest of the files are examples and files for your new software. You can dispose of them and replace with your own files. I have now placed all the files into my web root. Refreshing browser window will reveal the default starting page for Agile Toolkit.
Awesome. And I think by doing that we have reached our first milestone. So Agile Toolkit is that simple to install, and it works on Macs, on Windows machines, and Linux, of course. And well, I had a little look at Agile Toolkit already, and I've already learned that the core classes of Agile Toolkit can be divided like in 5 big categories: API, pages, view, model, and controller. And not only seems that seems to be more than the traditional MVC combination, but each of them is actually a class. So what's the purpose and the meaning for each category? Let me starting by asking, what is application class?
Application is one object responsible for everything that happens in your web application. Application classes are common to many frameworks, but in Agile Toolkit, you start by creating your own application class. Of course, you inherit it from one of the supplied application classes. Application class does everything by splitting execution into 2 fundamental steps: initialization and rendering.
When you mentioned can be inherited from one of the supplied classes, are there actually many of them?
Yes, there are a few. Depending on how you use Agile Toolkit, you need to pick a proper one. API frontend would be the most typical choice for a standalone application development. But you should use other API when building command line utilities or are trying to integrate Agile Toolkit with another framework or application.
So you mean Agile Toolkit can be integrated with, let's say, WordPress?
Absolutely. It can be used for building user interface in WordPress add-ons. Agile Toolkit wouldn't initialize any components which are unnecessary. In a way, application class only initializes the right components: database connection, routing, authentication.
Okay, and those components, which class type are they?
They are controllers.
Okay, clear. So that's a good understanding of what application class is. I suppose I can build my own application classes and inherit them. Let me ask about the next class, like what is the page class?
Page class is responsible for initializing and rendering the content of your page. A typical application would have dozens of pages. Each page corresponded to a web URL. Application will determine which page must receive the request, and it will initialize the proper page object accordingly.
Now, pages are classes as well and can be inherited?
Oh yes.
So, well, let's add a new page then.
Sure.
So while Roman is working on that new page we just want to create, I wanted to note something. When a web application or a framework has a single entry file which receives all the requests and then it decides what to do with it, this paradigm is called front controller, and it's used in most of the web frameworks today. The execution actually starts with the index PHP file, which downloads application class to do everything else.
As you can see, there are already a few pages in the page folder, and I have just added a new one. The class names corresponded with the name of the files and their location in the file system. That's how Agile Toolkit can find and automatically load the class without need to explicitly include them. The class also determines the URL how it appears in your browser bar.
Yeah, as I expected, this page is empty. Well, kind of, because I can see a menu. And where does the menu come from?
Menu is initialized by application class directly. It appears on all the pages. Let me show you how it's defined.
Okay, we probably go deeper in that when we are there. So, okay, next, tell us about views.
Sure. What other frameworks are calling widgets, gadgets, or components are called views in Agile Toolkit. These objects are responsible for producing a block of content on your page. In order to have one more view on your page, you must add it to the page. That's a fairly common concept to Agile Toolkit, adding objects. Let me add 3 objects to our blank page.
I know about the operator new and of course constructors. Are they not used in Agile Toolkit?
They are used, but internally in Agile Toolkit. As an Agile Toolkit developer, you only add objects. They automatically become associated with the owner object. During rendering, each object will render its elements, or children, first, and then render itself. In our case, the owner of all three new objects is page, but one of these objects could also be added into another one.
And now the lorem ipsum block has now moved inside a frame.
This concept of Agile Toolkit is rather popular. Some views would consist of many other views and use them to achieve the goal. A good example could be a form or CRUD.
Could you explain CRUD, please?
CRUD stands for Create, Read, Update, and Delete. That's a fundamental component of data editing. In Agile Toolkit, CRUD is implemented as a view. It relies on form, grid, pagination, buttons, and could even have a quick search field.
So that means I can have multiple CRUDs on the same page.
Not only that, but you can have them inside other views too.
I think from what I've heard so far, I can see a very significant difference between Agile Toolkit and some of the other frameworks I've looked into. Other frameworks tend to rely on a powerful template engine, which includes a lot of logic in them, while in Agile, the whole application is being built as a block where views are added into pages or into other views.
Agile Toolkit still has a template engine, but it's much more lightweight and has no logic at all. In fact, every view comes with associated HTML template. Even the page and application class have one template as well.
Well, that's a lot of templates to parse, I believe.
And that's why we need a super fast template parser.
So next, tell me what model is.
Model objects describe a different type of data our application will have to interact with. Models may rely on SQL or NoSQL database. The support for SQL, however, is much more in-depth, and I will focus on MySQL in particular. Model provide that data access channel between some of the more complex views and a physical database. The job of the model is to contain sufficient information about your data structure, behaviors, and also be able to exchange records of data.
Could you give me some examples of that?
Working on them.
Okay. So while Roman is busy with the example model for us, I will just go through some of the features of Agile Toolkit models I have noted down. A support for a range of data type like booleans, dates, conditions, multi-table models, apparently that would use joins, relation traversal, soft delete and audit, support for native features of SQL engine, and the list pretty much goes on. And so I can see that Roman's typing is not as fast as my talking, but we can see the model user here that extends the model table, and we're just adding some fields like first and last name.
For now, I will create a simple model for managing users. Next, let me show you how you can add that to a view. Form and grid are some of the fundamental views which help with data manipulation. From these two views, a simple editing solution can be constructed. CRUD is a view which combines grid with the form to give the standard functionality of adding, updating, and deleting database records.
So again, let me just note that model is a class 2, so inheritance is strongly encouraged here. And models map the business entities instead of database. So you may have a model where data is stored across several several tables, or you may have multiple models originating from the same table.
Yes, a good example would be a multi-user environment where data needs to be separated by user ID field. Model may have a condition to only allow access to the data of currently logged in user. This is the area where most of the frameworks struggle. They don't have a very good support for conditions like that.
What do you mean by that?
Unlike other implementation, Object Relational Manager in Agile Toolkit allows dynamic addition of conditions, fields, expressions, and with this, your queries become much more efficient.
Okay, finally, let me ask you about controllers. I can see already that they don't have much in common with the controllers as they are implemented elsewhere. So could you please explain what controllers do and how they can be used?
Controllers are added to certain objects in Agile Toolkit and enhance their functionality. A routing controller can be added to API. Database controller will enable interface with the database. Authentication controller will restrict your access. Logger is a controller which will enhance error and log output of your application. Those are just some examples of application controllers. The model can have controllers as well. Encryption controller can implement strong encryption on certain fields. Relation controller will enable model to use multiple tables. Then there are some general purpose controllers. Order is a controller allowing you to change the sequence of object elements. Useful when you need to add one more field into the form which previously was populated by the model fields.
Are there any controllers for views?
Yes. Form can have a controller which prevents CSF, cross-site forgery, by adding tokens. Sometimes even controllers can have more controllers. Authentication class can have a controller which will enable you to use cookies for remembering logged in user.
Okay, and how can a relatively simple structure of objects have so many extensions?
Well, first the two-pass execution helps, initialization and rendering. Controllers are added within initialization phase and can place callbacks on objects. Controllers can add new views, new fields, and even define new methods for other objects, or even globally.
Well, how is that possible in PHP?
PHP is a very powerful language. All of the objects in Agile Toolkit are inherited from a single class, and it defines a catch-all function, thus capturing method calls to other objects.
Well, I believe this all sounds like too much for the very first tutorial.
I agree. I just wanted to put a small teaser for hand-core developers. Developing add-ons for Agile Toolkit is great. It requires a deep understanding of the principles, but is really efficient and flexible.
Okay, so to summarize, many things can be added or changed in Agile Toolkit. I guess that's why you call it Agile.
Correct.
Well, thanks, Roman. In the next episode, we would like to enter deeper in Agile Toolkit, starting with a look at the directory structure more closely of a freshly installed toolkit, and also look on how we create pages, use custom templates, how to use forms, and lots more. What we want to do in the end is we want to build a website called Lost and Found, and it's an online resource for people that have lost personal belongings and those who actually found them. And Agile Toolkit seems to be a great platform for this project. And during the upcoming tutorials, our project will grow more and more complex while we adapt what we have learned to build our project.
Yes, and we will demonstrate step by step how to approach the development of online software. If you have never made any online software, it's a great opportunity for you to follow us.
Just before we conclude this tutorial, I have just a few more questions about the licenses and the availability of Agile Toolkit. I suppose the most important question is, Is Agile Toolkit free to use?
Agile Toolkit is free as in free speech. Agile Toolkit is using AGPL license, which requires developer to adopt a similar license for all the software based on Agile Toolkit. That's often the case with personal and school projects. Sharing is good and easy to do. I will explain how easy it is to develop your personal project and share it.
Well, can I still use Agile Toolkit commercially?
Open source license such as AGPL does not prevent you from using your project commercially. It only puts a restriction that you must provide source code.
What if I don't want to disclose my source code with others?
In that case, there are commercial license. You don't need it while you're developing, but once you're finished your project and launch it, legally you should own the license for your domain. This license permits you to run a software based on Agile Toolkit without disclosing your source code.
This is a little unusual, but I understand why you want to pursue more web developers into open source their code.
When I was looking at different licenses, I seen that most of the framework are using MIT or BSD licenses. As a result, I couldn't find any usable projects which would have been open sourced. Instead, everyone, even those who developed the personal projects or projects in school, never shared their source code. I believe that using AGPL license is much more proper, and it would give the community of Agile Toolkit many more examples of professional projects.
Well, since you mentioned, I would like to highlight again that Romans is running a web consultancy company which sells commercial licenses, develop web projects on Agile Toolkit, supports Agile Toolkit developers, offers courses, and can be found at agiletech.ie.
Yes, that supports me. So if you have any projects you'd like me to quote on, just write me a note in the contact form.
Well, I earn my living as the founder of bodalgo.com. It's an online resource I created myself using PHP MySQL, and it's for voiceover talents, like they are used in commercials, movies, presentations, video clips, and lots more.
If any of you are looking for professional recordings of commercial, clip, or tutorial, be sure to visit bodalgo.com and browse through all the talents. The site is not built on Agile Toolkit at the moment.
It's not yet built that way, but I really want to implement it with Agile Toolkit because it's such a fantastic framework, and I would have loved to start it like from scratch already having Agile Toolkit. Well, thanks, Roman, for this great first overview of what Agile Toolkit is capable of. And I think there lies some pretty interesting learnings ahead of us. And I have the feeling that very soon a lot of people want their web development to become agile.
Thank you, Armin. Let me remind you that the next episode of this tutorial will go into the practical application of Agile Toolkit to create a real simple web application. I will see you next time, and until then, stay agile.